welcome to this episode of 2 or 3 Peas in a Pod. For this episode, we're going to talk about something which has long been a bone of contention for both of us. It's the idea of truth, what it is. And we've been debating this conversationally for years. And it's finally a chance now in this podcast to hash out our differences. And we're going to do that with reference to 2 texts which mean a lot to us. So in my case, that's Chomsky's article, which was a speech by him. So it was a speech he gave in the mid-2000s in Rome. And basically, it's his idea of truth and what we can discover. It's called Science, Mind, and the Limits of Human Understanding. I think that's the title. Have I got that right, Delphine? Yeah. And so that's the essay that Delphine, that's my, personally, one of my favorite essays. And Delphine read that, and I read one of Delphine's favorite essays, which is Nietzsche's, as she tells me it's called, on truth. It's on, we don't know, this guy was a super genius, he was barely human, he is an it. On truth and lying in the non or in a non-moral or extra-moral sense. Isn't that it? On truth and lies in an extra-moral sense.
On truth and lying in a non-moral sense.
Close enough. Sorry, Nietzsche. And so I'm going to be summarizing that after Delphine summarizes my one. And then we'll check each other's summarizations and hash it out from there. So welcome. Delphine, do you want to take us off on your one then?
All right. So as far as I understand, Chomsky did a beautiful summary of the history of scientific inquiry. So he started with Descartes and mechanical philosophy, which is kind of the idea that, so mechanical philosophy is the idea that the world is kind of like a machine that could have been made by a super amazing artisan, and that is fully explainable. And Descartes added to that, I believe, a second aspect. So that's like Descartesian dualism. So he added the mind aspect. So it's res cogitans.
Mm-hmm.
I don't pronounce that.
Sounds good.
Okay, res cogitans is the mind and res extensa is the body, I guess, so the physical world. And he was like, okay, so we have to think differently about the mind because it doesn't fit in the mechanical sort of way that the physical world works. And that was well accepted for a while until Newton came along. And I didn't know I'd ever feel like a fan of Newton until I read this essay.
Really?
Yeah, he was super cool. Basically, Newton was like, so there is no res extensa because interaction is possible without contact in void space. And so a machine couldn't do that. And I don't know, I just find that super cool because the way Chomsky puts it, there was one particular moment. The traditional mind-body problem became unformulable with Newton's demolition of the only coherent notion of body. And I just find that so cool because they're scientists, right? You'd expect them to destroy the mind aspect. But he's like, the way he says it, he exercised the ghost, there's a ghost in a machine and he exercised the machine and kept the ghost intact.
That's it, yeah. When we all now think it's the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. He does talk about that towards the end as well. Some people think it's mysticism and it's bad. But that's
Owen Flanagan.
Yeah, we'll get to that. So that's what Newton did, which is absolute genius and really cool. And then Hume and Locke came. He named a few philosophers / scientists, but I remember mostly Hume and Locke were saying some truths are just beyond human reach.
That rang a bell with you, I'd say.
Absolutely. Which basically, they were saying that just the same way that a rat will never understand some kind of maze?
A prime number maze, yeah.
Yeah, I have no idea what that is, but yeah.
I looked it up. It's a kind of a maze that you can only solve, you can only get your way from one end to the other by doing prime number quizzes, like questions at each turn or something.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's literally like, of course they couldn't do that. Yeah, that's
Big
all it is.
surprise, yeah. So everyone finds that completely normal, that it's no rat will ever learn to do that because it's beyond their capacities. And the exact same way that rats can't do that, there's certain things that we can't understand or can't learn because it's physically beyond our capacities.
Yeah.
And then he goes on for a good while about this concept in the essay, and the way that it's kind of like lowering the goals of the scientific inquiry to kind of be realistic with the limits that humans have. And so yeah, there were a couple of things that I wrote down that were worth noting. He said thought is not more wonderful than other inexplicable things like gravity, etc. But that's not a reflection on the external world, on thought itself. It's more a reflection on the capabilities of humans. Meaning, yeah, I guess it's just that it just falls in the category of things that we don't understand.
Yeah, like action at a distance. Yeah. Gravity or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes to unify physics with some of these things, for example, neuroscience, you're going to actually have to rethink the entire way that you conceive of neuroscience if you want to unify them, and it's not necessarily going to fit neatly together. So Chomsky says that it's normal that there's some things we can't understand because like if you just look at the way that genes make us evolve, in order to evolve in one path, you have to exclude all the other possibilities. And he said he used a really cool word for what would happen.
Chomsky did.
Yeah. If he was like, if we didn't have, it's basically if we evolve in all the different ways that we can evolve.
Yeah, we'd be like an amoeba.
Yeah, what the hell does that mean?
You know an amoeba?
I don't know. It's a cool word, but I don't know what it means.
It's kind of like a bacteria. It's another type of like single cell organism.
Okay.
So it's just a really simple thing. It's really, if you look at it under a microscope, it's really jiggly and like it
blob,
has no
right?
real...
I pictured a blob. I heard that word and I was like, blob.
Yeah, you got it. That's it.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So basically, it's kind of cool, that we have limitations. Also because he says that without limits to our possibility of understanding things, we wouldn't have creativity. And he says that a quest that is infinite is not necessarily limitless.
Yeah, and gives English an example of something that's limitless but not infinite.
Yeah,
vice versa. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He said English is infinite, but it doesn't include Greek.
Yeah, and that's such a quick way to sum it up, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I wrote in the margin, yes, tell him, Queen.
Tell Chomskers.
Exactly. So yeah, and he was like, it's not contradictory to probe the limits of understanding and also to sharpen the boundary between what's mystery and what's conceivable.
Yeah.
And I couldn't really discern a clear conclusion, but it's kind of just a bunch of
He's thrown out a few ideas.
Yeah. It's a great essay. It's an excellent summary.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, and that was a good summary of his summary of that. I don't think I disagree with your characterization of anything or with anything that you've said.
Okay.
So there's going to be little for us to fight with there, but we can probably draw on some of that for what we're going to talk about.
That's good. Yeah.
Mysterianism and whatnot. And skepticism. I think that's kind of a big thing. That's kind of what these things have in common.
Yeah.
About the external world. Okay, so will I go for my one?
Yeah.
So he starts off with kind of, this mightn't be exactly chronological, but he goes into basically kind of some skeptical points, like we can't know when we look at a table or an apple, or he gives different examples. We can't know what the thing actually is because all we have is a sense perception, which itself can't be true because if a bee sees an apple or a flower or whatever, he sees a different thing than we do. And we can only imagine it, but there's a kind of, we view these things like apples or like objects that we see in the world. We take them to be true. It's true to say that there is an apple there and it is green. It's true because everybody agrees it's true. I don't know if he uses the word intersubjective, but I know that's what's kind of used to describe those things. There's a kind of socially agreed upon truth. which is built on top of a perceptual truth, which to us is that I pick up this apple, it's green. I pick it up tomorrow, it's green, and so on. And so that's happened within our own minds and within society. That's how we build up our idea of truth. And when we do this first time, and almost like a child or like a philosopher, we look at these things and we know, and Nietzsche knows that. I don't think it is Nietzsche. I thought it was Nietzsche, but maybe it's an American English thing. I've heard Nietzsche, I'm pretty sure.
It's not Nietzsche.
It's not Nietzsche? Okay. It's probably not, definitely not the French pronunciation anyway. Nietzsche. Nietzsche.
But
Nietzsche.
Yeah, whatever.
Okay.
Nietzsche's fine.
Nietzsche. I'll just stop correcting myself. So yeah, there's a like the perceptual reality, but if we think about it for a second, he encourages us, the reader, to do that. Then we find out that actually we don't actually know what the thing in itself is behind the apple, the thing creating the sense perception, because our connection with the world is mediated by our senses, which we know are imperfect, because different animals have, well, they're imperfect in their own right, but different animals have different senses and then perceive the world in different ways. So it only makes sense that our sense perceptions can't be true in some objective way. And so we're not seeing the objective world. I think that's, I'm not sure there are many scientists, actually there probably are lots of scientists who disagree with that now. They think we can find out what's objectively true. But skepticism is like a big issue in philosophy, and I don't think it's ever been solved satisfactorily to somebody who would hold objectivity to the standard that Nietzsche would. And I think that the standard a lot of people would when they kind of get into this. I can, for example, I have no rebuttal to what he says there. Like I'm totally on board with him there. Like I don't know what this laptop is in reality. I just know that it's useful, and I know that you see the same thing probably that I see, and so on.
Yeah, the thing you told me about how, like, if you look at something that's blue, it's actually all colors except blue because it absorbs all.
Yeah.
And it's so
weird, isn't it?
Like, that's always what I think about when I think about the thing in itself. Like, we have this perception, but in reality, what is it? It's just a bunch of like waves.
Yeah.
Waves through space. It's like, I don't know. It's
yeah.
I think it's very hard to disagree with this.
It is, and like we lose sense of that on a personal level as we get older. Like, I don't mean when we turn 20 or whatever, I just mean we're 50. Like, we just lose sense of that immediately as children. Like, we assume that everything that we see is real because it's so constant. And then so that's kind of one level of deception. There's a kind of perceptual difference, the perceptual gap between what we see, what we understand, what our five senses show us, and the objective world. And then there's a language gap as well. So we describe things in concepts. And a concept is just like if we both see a tree, we both see another tree, those two things are not identical. They're both trees. We're happy to call them trees. In fact, this links into that continuity thing in the Chomsky article, this idea he calls, I don't know if it's his phrase, but psychic continuity. So, okay, so no, this actually is the best example of psychic continuity. So if you just imagine a ship, like a wooden plank, old classic ship sailing through the sea, and you take off bit by bit one plank. So you take off a plank on the floor and you throw it off into the sea, and then you replace it with a plank from another ship. And you do that plank by plank until the whole ship is a completely different ship. Question is that the ship of Theseus? Is that the original ship? And I don't know what your intuition is. Mine is like, nah, not really. But then the question is, well, what if you get the ship behind it? What if you say all the while you've been sailing along, there's a ship behind you, he's been picking those pieces up and putting them in, and so you now do have that ship once again reincarnated behind that ship. Is that the ship?
Wow.
Yeah, and the point that he's making is there's not an objective answer to that. The answer is that whatever your intuition tells you about that question, that is a fact about your mind rather than a fact about the world. Whatever your sense of continuity in objects is, that's projected, like in a Freudian way, onto the world rather than an objective fact about the world. The objective fact about the world is that there were planks on that ship and now they're on that ship. Like there's no confusion objectively about what that is. But there's a psychic, or like, I don't mean that in a spooky way, there's a psychological aspect to this. And so that's, I think, if we're talking on levels, that's like the second level or layer of the deception that Nietzsche talks about, for fuck's sake. And there's the kind of, I think the third level is the science and philosophy and systems that use concepts. And sorry, we're talking about trees. So there's nothing about one tree that's identical to the things in another tree, or he gives the example of leaves. And the question is then, why do we give them all these, why do we call all leaves by the same name when they're completely different? It's just for simplicity's sake. It's because they're really leaves are objects of the mind rather than objects in reality. The concept of a leaf is, and it's like the Platonic. This is why I'm saying not all the ideas are new, because like Plato had the idea of, there were these Platonic ideal, like the, what are they called? Platonic solids, or he was like, what is chairness or what is treeness? There must be some chair out there from which which every example is an instantiation of.
Yeah,
You're
but
saying something?
I don't think Plato was arguing the same thing Nietzsche.
No. Sorry, he's using the bricks that Plato gave him to make his own argument. But yeah, there's the concept, and that's the science is just a bunch of metaphors, he says, and a bunch of concepts that have been put together and that are used to serve us. They're kind of useful to us. But they're not, science has forgotten, just as we have forgotten, that it's not actually in touch with objective reality. It's really dealing in metaphors. And so its claim to find the truth is arrogant, because it has forgotten that it's not actually in touch with what it thinks it's in touch with, which is that objective reality behind the apple, because it's already abstracted one or two layers from that by talking in concepts, which are not things in themselves. And then he contrasts that with art, by saying that art at least says when it's people dress up when they do a play or they do something artistic or creative, they're using that same faculty of the mind, the intellect, to blow apart those, to just kind of make fun of those concepts and to show them for what they are. They are concepts. And so art is honest in its dishonesty, because it's not pretending to be dealing in the truth. It's open about the fact that it's lying. And so we shouldn't be as derisive of art for that reason. As we should be of science, because science pretends it's not lying when it is. I think that's the major thing I got from it. I hope I didn't. Tell me if I missed anything major there.
No, I have two comments. Does he say science or does he just say concepts?
I've been taking it to mean science. I mean, he did mention science a few times and philosophy, and I think he's kind of referring to that. But I might have just been reading into that something that wasn't there. Maybe. Yeah, I think the idea is the same either way, though.
Yeah, I think he would apply it to science, but I think he really, I mean, for me, when I read this, I'm thinking about just language and what we think we know in general about everything.
Yeah, we should use that, because science is more restrictive than that notion. So we should probably go ahead with using your definition there. Yeah, and that could well be what he meant, because science wasn't as established back then as it is now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I want to just add that the super cool thing he said, that he was like, people actually love being deceived. They just don't like when the deception is harmful to them.
Yeah.
He talks about lying and how we have a concept of a liar, but everyone's a liar. And it's why it's called truth and lying in a non-moral sense, because everyone's lying all the time, because no one's telling the truth. Yeah, you know what the next thing we should do is we should talk about how we should link the essays to our view of truth, because my view of truth isn't 100% this essay, and I'm sure yours is with the essay. So should I go first? So we go Nietzsche, Chomsky,
Let's do it.
Okay. This is a good tongue twister. Nietzsche, Chomsky. Okay. So I read this essay for school when I was 18. I don't know if you remember that when we first met, the first conversation we ever had, I told you about this essay.
Seriously? Oh shit, I don't remember that. Oh my god.
Yeah, it was like a few months after I had discovered it. Anyway.
Oh, okay, you're still in the middle of it, really.
Yeah, I was still like, this is who I am. But yeah, and you thought I was an American exchange student.
Yeah. I can't believe it. Yeah. I was like, when did you join? Are you just doing the year, or are you doing one semester?
Oh, that was great. Anyway, okay, so yeah, this absolutely blew my mind. It completely transformed my world. I agreed with everything, and still when I read it now, I'm like, there's little tiny things I would pick him up on or ask him more questions about, but most of it is like, holy crap, like this
rock solid.
Yeah, and it is earth-shattering in the sense that everything we know is based on language, because we understand everything through words. At least us wordy thinkers do. And you realize language is completely arbitrary. You're like, okay, so I don't know anything. And like, it's true. What makes two different leaves fall under the same category, you know? And but the thing about this essay is that I think Nietzsche uses really bold terms, and he's really cutting in his statements. And for me, what I took from this essay was more of a perception shift than really like, because this is too big. It's too, the way he describes it, it's like building a cobweb on top of a flowing river. Like you can't live with the concept that nothing is real because you know. And I
you can't live on the river.
Yeah, exactly. And I wrote this in my notes when I was reading about it, because he's like, oh yeah, you know what makes two leaves the same? They're all different. Every single, he was like explaining that you have a concept. Honesty was his example. You do one thing that's honest, and then you do something else that's also honest, and then you do something else that's also honest, and you put them all in the same category based on like, oh, they don't have everything in common, but they have some things in common. They're all honest. It's just so arbitrary. Like even just saying it there. And what he's saying is that the way the world is that there are all these things that we put in one category, but they're not equivalent to each other. But the problem is that humans need categories to understand the world.
Yeah.
The world is chaos. The universe is chaos. We know and we accept that. But yeah, we need categories because otherwise we can't live and we can't go forward. And I guess he's not trying to talk against that. He accepts that it's out of necessity that we made language and that we built our, you know, foundation of knowledge is on this flowing river. But the problem is that we forgot that it's a flowing river, and we've started to feel and act and talk as if we're basing everything we know on solid things that are really real in reality. And this is what I think you believe about truth that bothers me, that you think, and this goes back to Chomsky as well, that you think we have access to the real reality of things. I think we don't, and I don't think we ever will.
Me too. So disappointing in this. No, I never changed my mind. This was I never changed my mind. I didn't change my mind on that. That's what I've always believed as well. And we've actually come to this what seems like an impasse before a few times. I'd be like, you'd be like, I mean, thinking about our discussions when we did. Did you do it? I did anyway. The skepticism about the external world module in college. It's this. Yeah, no, I'm totally on board with the idea that we could be brains in a vat, for example. We don't know what's going on in the outside world. I'm fully on board with that, but I think where we disagree on, and I have written this down. Wait, do you want to say anything more actually before I continue?
I don't think so.
Okay. I think what we're really talking about then, because I'm totally with you there. Like we're on a web floating in a river, and we kind of forget we're on a web. We don't have contact with the river. That's kind of the key point, and that's no disagreement there. But what I think our disagreement
for you, the river is the thing in itself.
Yeah. Okay. So we have no contact with that, and we were on a web, and we forget we're on a web. Totally agree. But what I disagree on, and there may be like a misunderstanding between us about what the other person thinks. So I'm going to characterize as best I can what I think our disagreement is, and you tell me if this is what it really is. So I think it's that we're finally getting to the nub of it, because I think we wore each other out all the other times when we were doing it, so we couldn't actually get this far, or we got this far and then said fuck it. So let's really push through this time. I think what we're ultimately talking about is, let me just go through like a thing. We're on the web. You say, look, Emmet, there's water beneath us, where actually this web is not what things really are. And you think all along, or you thought until right now, it seems that I said, no, the web is the river. The web is everything there is. And you're like, oh my God, for fuck's sake, read this essay, boy. And we have this conversation, and you find out to your shock and horror that I actually do believe that there is a river. And now you're like, where are we going to go from here? And I think our real disagreement is on the usefulness of the of the web. And I think, the usefulness and the validity of the web, and maybe even the validity of the web as it is, or should we have made different strands and so on. And I think where we're coming at this from in different ways is that towards the last few paragraphs, when Nietzsche talks about the different types of the artist and the artist, he called him the artistic man and the scientific man, something like that. I think I'm coming at this very much from the side of the scientific man who prizes that way of thinking, whereas you prioritize the other way of thinking. And we both might acknowledge that same truth, except perhaps you're more willing to break up and throw apart this conceptual edifice that as he calls it. I'm less willing to do that. I have a kind of conservatism about the structures that we've built up, the conceptual schema, and you are far more liberal in your approach to them, and you want to, take the thing he talks about, putting things up on a shelf and having this kind of precarious structure. You're totally okay with taking things off the shelf, about burning down a few shelves and all this stuff. I'm not. I'm like, let's hold on to this, because maybe we lose something when we do that. So it's a kind of, it might almost come down to like a personality trait or a style, I suppose, like a cognitive style or emotional readiness to accept change. It's kind of the wave thing that we've always been talking about. And funny that we use the wave metaphor. It might come down quite simply to that. Have I characterized our disagreement well?
I think so. Yeah. The way that I visualize it is that you're on the web and you're happy to talk about the web inside the web, whereas I've stepped off the web and I'm looking at it. And so I can still see everything. This makes me sound like I have some weird superiority thing, but it's like I can
well, go on, say it.
I can still see everything that you see. I can still see everything that's in the web, but I also see, like, I'm looking at it in a frame that includes outside the web, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh yeah, this is true in this framework.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's all. Like when we say something true, so there's different categories of truth for me, because so when we say something's true, like I'll be like, yeah, it's true in this framework, and I feel like you just say it's true because you're in the web.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Okay. Now we're on the same page, and now what I'm going to say is that my disagreement with that is that the framework as it currently is could be very useful. Like it could be like something about like Einstein physics or whatever, or even Newtonian physics, which got us to the moon. Like us being humans, not being Americans. Sorry to our American listeners for taking credit for that. Or thousands of American listeners. Like that was good enough for that, and I'm happy to call that true. And I think when my concern with your belief and why I want you to come over to this dark side of the web is that I fear that in your like quickness and your desire to throw away or replace that webbiness and those schemas and kind of constructs that we have, you're also going to throw away some good stuff, and you're going to throw away stuff like our ability to get to the moon. Because you're like, oh, Newtonian physics is only true in that framing of things, or like it's only true that that's a tree in that framing of things. My concern is that there's loads of good things, loads of useful things that are likely to remain true and useful on this framing, and your dismissal of them, I don't like.
Okay, you're talking in a very functional. You're talking like I'm a scientist at NASA who's gonna fuck shit up because I'm like. Truth is relative, guys. Let's just throw something in the air and see what happens.
I picked an extreme example, but because it's easier to define the difference there. But we might be able to get into more subtle examples if we can. But like, tell me why that's wrong in broad strokes, anyway.
Well, I think the difference is because there's something rational that in my way of thinking that I don't think you realize.
Right.
Which is that I will think differently about the question. What molecules make up water, then I will think about the question something more conceptual.
Okay.
Which is why I didn't like the way that you use the word science when talking about Nietzsche's essay.
Right.
Because for me, even for me, even if it is a translation, it is truth in a way, what we know about physics.
Yeah.
It's a translation. So it's not, we will never see the thing in itself, but I think as accurate a translation can be, to have the drawing of atoms in our heads and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I accept those kinds of truths more, not completely, but more completely than I would accept, for example, the question, is, yikes, are you...
If you haven't got it in 30 seconds, then I win.
Are you an introvert?
Yeah, that's a good question. That is a good question, actually. Yeah, no, it is. That's exactly the kind of thing, because introversion is exists in that big five thing, and that's a model. That's a scientific model. So the question is that model true?
Well, I want to zoom out to that.
Oh, you can zoom out, but yeah. Well, I think that's what we're talking about, though.
Yeah, no, definitely, it applies. I mean, truth applies to everything, right? But this is something that I wanted to like throw in here at some point, is that we both studied psychology. We both know what social science research is, and we know that everything is arbitrary. Like everything we explain in social science is based on...
Oh no, I disagree there as well.
It's a theoretical model that was made up, and even if it was tested and like proven or whatever, it's like it's based on something that was made of the web. It was made of...
It's arbitrary. It's arbitrary. So I think, hold on, I think I know where this disagreement is. That is arbitrary, like our social science models are arbitrary in the same way that us calling an apple is arbitrary. Like, only in that sense. I think within the framework, within our modern like scientific framework, it is not arbitrary. Like if you take personality, that's been shown cross-culturally to be true, that there are five facets to it, 5 dimensions rather.
Okay. Yeah. But it's like, it's not the same as an apple and apple. It's like if you stack 5 apples on top of each other, more like 500 apples on top of each other, and you're like, that's 500 apples. That's an apple, an apple, an apple, an apple times 5. It's like, so it's like on top, it's higher up in the construction, which is why to me it's more arbitrary than to say
it's more abstract. Like in the case of the apple, we're talking about a perceptual lie. Like, yeah, I think perceptual lie is okay, is it? But but I want to distinguish between perceptual and like more of a conceptual lie. Like I agree with you that the conceptual problem, when you're talking about personality psychology, like that's at the level of concepts, and that's what I talk about, the conceptual edifice, or when Nietzsche talks about that, the conceptual edifice. That's what I thought he's talking about science. Like the whole social science models are good examples, I think, of conceptual edifices. And an apple might be an example of a perceptual edifice, or like the idea of an apple. But like you say, those things are far closer to ground reality because they're only mediated by our senses and not by our language, which has to naturally be a concept. So I think the apple is closer to being true in a way. To say that an apple is there, you're closer there to being true than in saying that somebody is an introvert or an extrovert. I agree with that. Yeah. But I'm saying the arbitrariness of it in form is the same. Like let's say that there's kind of 3 layers here. There's the layer of the river itself, which is truth in itself. Then there's the web floating on that, which is apples, which are perceptual reality, apples, oranges, whatever. Then on top of that, there's a conceptual. We can skip a few layers, like we can say languages in there. There's a conceptual layer. So it's the web of a house of cards. Let's imagine. What?
Okay.
Do you get me? Like the conceptual web, so the conceptual level, or the house of cards, lies on top of the perceptual level. Lies on top, because we need to do things in science with our concepts that are like when we make a claim in science, we're not saying that's true about fundamental reality. We're saying that's true in that framework, like you're saying, but that's true with the basis of that, the very ground truth in the case of science, or in the case of scientific concepts, being physical reality. We're not grounding social science concepts in physics. We're grounding them in the lowest we could go is neuroscience, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
In social science, it's the low. We can't go any lower, and we're not going to go to physics or apples, or whatever. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. You confused me when you brought neuroscience into it. But
Well, neuroscience just being like the most physical domain of psychology, so the closest to
yeah,
that initial
biology.
there. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think where we disagree on there is you're saying that there's a framework. You're saying that, like, I think introversion is true in that framework. Introversion, somebody can be introverted. It's true to say that somebody is introverted in the scientific framework, but you could just as easily make another framework and that would not be true. You're saying.
Well, okay, there's a lot of things. There's a lot. It's very chaotic.
Yeah.
I just want to say a few things. So I think the introversion question is higher up than the Apple question because or the big 5 personality traits, any social science model is based on a series of assumptions.
Yeah.
Call them pillars of salt.
Nice.
And so that's why to me it's kind of more out there. But because we're talking about, like, you know, levels of arbitrariness, like what does that even mean? Like, does that even matter? Is kind of what I'm thinking when we're having this conversation.
Does what even matter?
How true this is, what framework it's true in, you know, is it the web or is it the house of cards, like all of that stuff. Like, what it means in concrete reality to me that these concepts are arbitrary means that several truths can exist at the same time and be equal. That's the way that Nietzsche has affected the way that I see the world, and it's reached a point where I can have 3 different beliefs all opposing each other about one thing, and I cannot pick one.
Could you pick an example to make it more clear?
I thought of an example in social science, which is IQ / intelligence. No one has ever agreed on a definition of intelligence. IQ is kind of the winner at the moment, but you know, like we had a class on psychometrics, and they spent a big part of that class teaching us the other forms of intelligence and teaching us to explain to parents of children who are getting their IQ tested that IQ is kind of arbitrary and that it's like a number, but it's not really, you know, it's, for me, intelligence is the most obvious example that we have no idea what we're talking about. And we just invented a bunch of definitions and picked the one that we like best / that was proven most in tests or whatever. And at the end of the day, it's just, you know, you get a number, but it doesn't really mean anything.
I think that's where we're definitely, I'm feeling a bit of resistance there, and I'm trying to articulate exactly what that is, because I think it is the fundamental issue is how important to us is the validity of scientific truth. Like, obviously there may be a different conception of intelligence or personality in 100 years. Like, historically that's been true. We keep on changing, although intelligence has been a long time. But let's say it's like, I don't know, 200 years, if we have a similar-ish psychology. Even if we have a similar-ish psychology, there will be vastly different definitions. Like, you can't recognize the science of the mind today in how it was 100 years ago or 150 or 200 years ago. So I think it makes sense to expect that it will change between them. So I agree with you there. What I don't agree with is that the thing that I think is kind of slipping in what you're saying, which is that since personality or intelligence doesn't exist in the way that we've formulated it, these concepts are arbitrary, and everything is equally valuable and equally invaluable. And you can pick and choose whatever you want, because I can just use, like, if I learn, for example, I have a kid and they get like their IQ tested when they're 12 or something, and it's like 70. That's I'm not going to be happy to hear that, and I'm going to be like, oh, for fuck's sake, damn. That's why he never does well in spelling tests.
Throw out the kid, get another one.
Yeah, I want a new one. I want a refund. I think those things matter to us, and I think we're right to put some level of importance on them. And for somebody to come along and tell me, oh no, that concept is meaningless. Like, it's not meaningless to me. I have to deal with my kids, the effect this has on my kid. And our conceptualization of that may not be totally empirically correct, or may not be correct in a way that, to a level or in a framing that will seem correct in 200 years, and that's maybe less correct than it will eventually be. What I'm saying is that it's useful enough, it's good enough for us to put our eggs in that basket for the time being, because what other basket do we have than the best of science? And so when you're saying it's all arbitrary, I push back against that, because look, it may not be perfect, but it's the best we've got. And I'm not willing to say that's fundamentally true, because it's not the ocean. It's not the river in this example, but it's truer than anything else you come up with. I think you're drawing kind of a false equivalence here when you say that it's arbitrary. Yeah, you're kind of slipping in, I think, anything goes. And I think that's wrong.
Yeah, but that's not what I believe, and that's not how I function.
Okay.
The thing with Nietzsche is that when our teacher was teaching Nietzsche to us, he said that there were fairies at the bottom of his garden, and that no one can tell him otherwise, and that's basically what Nietzsche endorses. And it's kind of, I think the way that Nietzsche expresses these ideas is, like I said, really radical, really bold and cutting. And I think that comes through when I say things like it's all equally valid. I don't actually feel like it's equally valid, because
why do you say it? Just trying to be edgy.
Because that's just your interpretation of the language I'm using.
Now you're being arbitrary, fairy with me.
No, so basically it's...
What do you really believe then, if that's not what you really believe?
What I believe isn't that it's all equally valid, but that it's... I don't think the gap between, for example, IQ and the other forms of intelligence is as big as we pretend it is.
I think that's purely like, how is that not completely a scientific discussion? Like whatever, like you would agree, like whatever turns out to be true psychometrically. I know we don't have a perfect psychometrics, and so not everything can fit in the testing and all that. But if we could somehow incorporate other measures of life achievement or of creative achievement or something like that into this concept of IQ, would it not be more relevant or more true at that point? Like, surely that's a discussion to be had entirely within science. You don't need to step outside of science and go to some other domain to do that.
This is my point. I feel like you're very functional about this, and I'm very philosophical about this.
I don't see a distinction.
Okay. So yeah, no, I don't know. I guess maybe intelligence is the wrong answer. I mean, wrong example. That sounded really dramatic.
It was like you just had like like an enlightenment moment there. I was going to leave you to it. Stop the camera dramatically and start writing shit down.
Okay. This is terrible. This bothers me so much. I have 100 moments in my life where I was like, truth is so relative. Look how obvious it is. And I can't summon any of those bloody examples right now. I don't know. I see what you mean. But see, okay, look. I kind of want to use this moment right now as an example. I see what you mean. You're looking at numbers and you're like, well, this has a higher statistical proof of whatever than this one.
Nice impression of me, by the way. Well, actually. Yeah, go on. I know what you mean.
So you're working with numbers. You're like, oh, the stats show blah, 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 whatever. And so you're like, science can tell us definitely IQ is like the form of intelligence. But I agree with that. I see why that makes sense to you, but I still disagree with it.
You're gonna have to say why, like.
I'm gonna say why. Because I guess I just can't stop thinking about the forms of the other ways that we can conceive of it that no one's ever conceived of it as, and the empty space between the different definitions of intelligence.
Yeah, but can you just like do that? Right? Is there something else you want to say?
No, go on. I'm just having. It's fine. I'll tell you later.
Okay. I'll try and channel that right now in what I'm about to say. So, can you not like accept that there is another way of conceptualizing it, and think we don't have that right now? So, for the moment, I'll use the best thing we have, and in the meantime, while we're using that, I'll go off and I'll work on some other way of thinking about it, which is what's
Yeah.
been going on for the last few hundred years, and then I'll come up with it, let's say, and now we're going to be using this one because it's shown to be the best one. But
Yeah.
the thing is,
No. I agree with
when
that.
you show that to be the best one, you will show to be the best within a scientific framework.
Yeah.
You can't escape that as the like the framework may change, but there will be the framework there. And so I think okay, yeah, maybe your problem your like contention is not with frameworks themselves, and that's kind of what I'm assuming, even though I know that's not true. You don't have a problem with frameworks. Your problem is with the particular framework that exists.
No. See, you
No.
keep talking as if I want to scrap the framework. I don't want to scrap anything. I don't want
You
to
just talked
burn
about doing that there though. You just talked about doing that there. You said I want to create a new one. You said.
Well, yeah, but that's how science works. You create a
Yeah,
better theory.
that's scrapping though. That's scrapping and putting in a new one.
Yeah, but you agree with that. You said in 200 years
Yeah.
it's going to be different.
I do.
Yeah,
I do.
okay. No, I'm not arguing against what you just said. What you just said of like, oh yeah, this is the best we have yet, so we're going to use this. I agree with using the best theory that we have so far.
Yeah.
But
I'm going to hold you to that, by the way. I'm going to bring you back to that moment in the conversation when you, because I feel like you've said the opposite of that a few times.
Maybe everything and its opposite are always true. So
that's chalk on nails on a chalkboard to me.
Okay. No. Okay.
I mean, if anything, that sentence doesn't. That cannot be true. A thing on its opposite cannot be true.
We'll get to it. Humans are weird, man.
Oh my god. That's not even true. It doesn't even hold together as in a sentence.
We'll get to it. You're gonna make me forget my point.
Oh, sorry. I know you had it. Yeah, go on.
I'm really bad at short-term memory. Yeah, so we work with the best theory that we have so far. That's why what I mean that you are talking functionally. I agree with you functionally. But it's important to me that because the IQ test is a perfect example. I know this because I administer IQ tests now. That's like my job. And everyone that I talk to about it has the same view and the same attitude when talking to parents about it as we were taught in UCD, which is, take these results with caution, and the reason for that is because they don't use the words that I use because I just have a bit less of a filter, I guess, or maybe I just see it more boldly because of Nietzsche or whatever. But it's like, this number isn't prescriptive. This is like the best definition of intelligence that we have so far, and we're going to give you this number and we're going to work with it. But there is this awareness. So you're working with it, and you are in your actions completely acting as if it was the only truth. But in the way that you think about it, you're holding in your awareness that it's not.
Yeah.
You're remembering that it's an illusion, even if you're working with the illusion.
Completely agree. I completely agree with that. As long as you mean by it's not true, when you say it's not true, as long as you don't mean it's just as untrue as making up a number on the spot. As long as you're okay with
that. No, I don't mean that. I see
the
spectrum in there. Yeah.
No, in that case, I agree. I agree completely.
Okay.
Yeah.
The reason
and I don't know who's conceding what the point to who. I don't know who's come closer to the other one now.
I still feel like we're just understanding each other's opinion better, because I feel like I think because we have such personality differences, we assume that the other thinks something, and it's not even true.
No, you're right. It's projection 101 right here.
By the way, on that, I kind of noticed something about that when I was reading the 2 articles. So I read the Chomsky thing, and it's like this, historical, factual paper that's like just giving you the cold heart. You can't really argue with anything. It's very Sam Harris. And that's your article that you chose to represent your view of truth. And then Nietzsche is just like this insanely emotional, like everything is a lie and everything is like something that you can look at from different perspectives, and it's this weird, like intense thing. And I'm like, that is just so Emmet and Delphine, like that is just
yeah. I agree. That is the difference. I'm just not as. I mean, I was really blown away by the article, by the essay rather.
yeah.
But when I go around and walk around and I think about this, and I think about this after we have this conversation, I'm gonna just purely because it's new and it's interesting. I'm gonna be thinking about Nietzsche's one, but like when I think about what I believe, I am gonna go to the Chomsky version, and I'm just gonna say there are mysteries, there are things we don't know, and I am resigned to operating within whatever framework we currently have at the moment. I think that's fine, and I'm willing to accept that as true. And when somebody says that, like, there is no such thing as personality, or there is no such thing as introversion or IQ, I'm just going to be like, that's just objectively wrong. And I'm going to say objectively wrong, knowing that I'm not meaning it in the Nietzschean sense, but I'm fine with that because it's the best we have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we should all be using the best we have. And I mean, I don't see where we disagree then, because I completely agree with everything you just said there. And I mean, if you're administering IQ tests, you have to keep in the back of your mind or in the front of your mind. Even in fact, you're even keeping it in the front of your mind. You're saying to these parents, this isn't not even a death sentence, but this is not that prescriptive. Like it says something. It says something that you would call true on some level, not the deep level, but it's true in a sense. And we may get better at it in a few decades, but like it's not prescriptive, I suppose, in a really narrow way. I think it wasn't meant to be. I think that it accepts that, surely.
Yeah, well, that's good. But that's what Nietzsche says in the essay. He doesn't say we have to break down the cobwebs. He just says the problem is we've forgotten their illusion. So as long as you keep in mind that everything's an illusion, you can work on all of the pretend certainties that you have. But it's just bearing in mind that they're not true.
Damn. Yeah. I agree. That's fine. So have we been disagreeing all this time about our disagreement? I don't know. I still think, now again, you may be right. It may be the personality difference. It may be that when I hear you say something like it's all arbitrary, I straight away go into what I think that you're saying what I would mean if I said that. And if I said it was all arbitrary, what I would mean is everything's as good as everything else.
So this is great. I mean, I'm incorporating this into my notion of you, that you accept it. Will
nice,
forever
your
be
concept of me.
Yeah.
It's not the real me.
No, it's not. Thank you for listening to the first episode of Two Peas in a Pod, your podcast for intellectual stimulation. At this point in the conversation, Emmet and I found a new point of disagreement regarding what to do with what's beyond the limits of our understanding. It's enough of a debate to deserve its very own episode, which will be Truth Part 2. We'll probably have another 2 parts after that one, as it's a pretty thorny subject, as you've seen. And in the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed our pilot, as well as the various topics that will come up in the next few months. Talk to you soon, and stay safe.